You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Turning now to a look at the aid situation in Gaza after Israel resumed deadly strikes on the territory yesterday. We'll start with a local perspective. Like so many others, Jas Ikeda struggled with the images and stories coming out of Gaza of the widespread destruction and the growing starvation. Like others, she felt frustrated that more wasn't being done to help people caught in the conflict. Unlike most others, Ikeda had a lot of sailing experience. So when she heard about the Global Sumud Flotilla, she jumped at the chance.
I saw that it was ocean-based, sea-based, and also activism-based. Those are two sides of myself that I pursue on a day-to-day basis. And I feel like I'd actually been waiting for the flotilla for years.
The flotilla consisted of 42 small to mid-sized vessels setting out from Spain, carrying food, supplies, and hundreds of activists. The stated goal was to challenge Israel's blockade and show solidarity with Palestinians.
At this point in time, because governments are not able to make the right choices, it's up to civilians and everyday people to put on a mission like this in attempts to feed our friends.
They were intercepted and detained by the Israeli military on October 1st, an outcome they knew was likely. She and other activists were held for about 6 days.
I wasn't allowed to use the toilet, and then we were forced into all these places for hours and just told to wait. Some of these places, we had barely any clothes on, and they were extremely cold. It was nighttime, and they blasted the air conditioning. We had to huddle for warmth in these mobile cages that were meant to transport us.
Israel's foreign ministry alleged on X that the flotilla was organized by Hamas. The agency also wrote, quote, all the legal rights of the participants in this PR stunt were and will continue to be fully upheld. After Ikeda was released, donors helped her cover the cost to fly back to the U.S. I spoke with her about the day she arrived back at Orcas Island. She says that despite their inability to break through and deliver any aid, and despite the treatment they endured, the Global Sumud Flotilla's attempt was worthwhile.
For me and my comrades, we know that we're on the right side of history. We can stand on our morals, our integrity, our willingness to put our bodies on the line for the sake of others. We and I know that I still have my humanity within me, that I'm connected to my soul, and that I have a community of people that love me.
The timing of Ikeda's voyage, capture, and release coincided with a historic moment. Just 3 days after Ikeda was released, Israel and Hamas agreed to a deal for a ceasefire and the release of hostages. The deal, which was negotiated and pushed by the Trump administration, included an agreement that, quote, full aid will be immediately sent. Such aid would be a lifeline for Palestinians. In August, Gaza was confirmed to be under famine conditions. The ceasefire deal gave a lot of hope to aid organizations that have been stymied by the tight control Israel holds over the border. But flare-ups of violence have threatened that aid. On Tuesday, the Israeli military struck targets in Gaza, killing more than 100 people. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused Hamas of violating terms of the ceasefire. For more on the status of humanitarian support headed into Gaza, yesterday I interviewed Mara Cronenfeld. She is the executive director of the UNRWA USA National Committee. UNRWA stands for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East. We spoke just hours after the strikes by Israel, and it wasn't clear then what the attacks would mean for the ceasefire. This morning, the Israeli military said the ceasefire would resume. At this point in a fragile and uncertain situation, I asked Mara what her impressions were of the latest strikes.
Yeah, the truth is there's been ceasefire violations almost since it was declared. So this is an ongoing activity, unfortunately. And we just hope that calm will prevail and full-throated humanitarian aid will be let in. And the people of Gaza who've been under such hardship and have experienced atrocity after atrocity will have the chance to really fully start to heal and rebuild their lives.
What is the latest picture of how much aid is actually getting in, and how does that compare to the need on the ground?
Yes. So yesterday we understood about 200 trucks of aid were let in the Kerem Abu Salam crossing. And our understanding is that something to the tune of roughly 100 trucks on average have been getting in since the ceasefire. The truth is that some 500 to 600 trucks of humanitarian aid are necessary just to address the humanitarian conditions on the ground, the malnutrition and acute malnutrition that many are facing. And 100 to 200 trucks is just simply not enough. And this is not the 500 to 600 is dealing with immediate needs, certainly not taking care of all the needs that would, all of the equipment and supplies that would be necessary to truly start to rebuild Gaza or to start any sort of new economic activity in the Gaza Strip. We're not only facing a humanitarian crisis, but also a cash liquidity, a liquidity crisis where there's just simply not enough cash, and that has been one of the aspects of causing inflation and overpriced food items. And the other element that your listeners should be aware of is that a lot of the trucks that have been let in are commercial trucks. These are commercial trucks with Israeli goods sometimes that are being let in and that are for sale. So there needs to be more humanitarian aid given to the people via the authorities, the Israeli authorities, letting in more humanitarian aid trucks, way more than at present.
I read some critical coverage in the New York Times today about that issue of a lot of the goods coming across the border at this point end up being for sale. And, you might see chocolate, for example, as being one of the goods that's for sale. And not that there's anything wrong with chocolate, but I'm assuming that when you are in a state of famine, there are certain goods that should be prioritized in terms of nutritional value. What about the type of aid that's coming across? Do we have a sense of how much is donated and is actually going to reach people, or how much is going to be for sale and maybe potentially not nutritionally ideal for this kind of situation?
Yeah. My understanding is the vast majority of aid coming in is more on the commercial side, and this is problematic for the reasons you've outlined. When you have humans that have faced famine, severe malnutrition, you're absolutely right. There has to be a regimented, really thoughtful approach to pulling them back from that edge, and certainly luxury goods, chocolate is not the way you do that. The other problem with the sale of goods is that only people who have cash, who have the ability to buy these goods, are able to. And so you have seen, mutual aid societies like my colleague Hani Madhoun, who works at UNRWA USA, but his family runs an amazing soup kitchen feeding tens of thousands of people because of the contributions they've received from Americans and around the world, are able to buy these goods and then make food for their soup kitchens. But this is only, as he would say himself, only feeding small numbers of people. So we need those large humanitarian aid agencies with the goods, with the food that can feed millions. Frankly, when UNRWA was allowed during a temporary ceasefire earlier this year, they were able to feed the whole of the population in a very short time. And UNRWA has the equivalent of some 6,000 trucks of food, emergency medicine, and shelter aid that sits just beyond the border right now that's not being let in. I mean, this is simply a travesty, and UNRWA could be involved in saving lives right now at scale with the 11 to 12,000 staff members it has on the ground. But it continues to be iced out of bringing aid in. And this is despite the recent International Court of Justice ruling that reiterated what we've known, frankly, from the Colonna report of the French foreign minister, of the internal investigative report of the United Nations, that there is no, in any way, sort of entwinement of UNRWA and Hamas, and that, more and more it is very clear that these allegations by the Israeli government have been a smokescreen more than anything else, and fortunately have resulted in the loss of many, many lives that could have been saved. saved.
Yeah, I just want to give people background if they are not caught up. So under the Biden administration, UNRWA lost funding from the U.S. and some other countries after Israel had claimed that some employees were part of the October 7th attack. Secretary of State Marco Rubio recently claimed that UNRWA had become a, quote, subsidiary of Hamas and would not be a part of aid delivery for Gaza. Now, this claim has been, as you noted, discredited by the International Court of Justice. But it sounds like, despite a lot of experience on the ground and delivering aid in Gaza, you are still not allowed to operate in Gaza, and that doesn't seem to be changing. Or what is the outlook on that?
Yeah, very good question. And I want to be clear to you and our readers, because in this fog, so to speak, of war and also active disinformation and misinformation, it is really hard to understand what's going on. So essentially, UNRWA is unable to bring goods into the Gaza Strip in large part. And that is because the Israeli authorities will not let UNRWA bring in these thousands of truckloads of goods that they have ready to feed people, ready to build shelters for people, ready to be used to build shelters for people, and medical aid that's in extreme need right now. That said, there are upwards of 12,000 individuals who've worked for UNRWA for many years, sometimes decades, who are on the ground. These are Palestinians in Gaza who work every day. And short of going into Gaza and killing them all, which God help us, that won't happen, these Palestinian workers of UNRWA have been the backbone of the humanitarian aid operation, and they are still operating. In fact, over 50% of the patients who are seen in a given day in Gaza are seen by UNRWA medical staff, by doctors, nurses, and medical staff workers. And UNRWA was never meant to be the primary provider of medical aid in Gaza, but that has happened because of the systematic destruction of the hospital system in Gaza. So not only are UNRWA staff providing essential medical aid, again, to over half of the patients who need it in Gaza right now, but they are providing drinking water. They've provided 2 billion liters of drinking water to the population of Gaza since October 2023. They have, in terms of the total of actually patients that have been seen, that is 15 million patients that have been seen since October 2023, on average something like 15,000 patients a day. And UNRWA is also providing some semblance of learning, of teaching and learning to young people. Before the war in Gaza, UNRWA educated almost 300,000 young people, about half of the population of young people, grades first through ninth grade, and is ready to educate 660,000 children who are entering their third year now out of school. UNRWA just needs the ability to repair all of those many buildings, schools that were turned into shelters, that were heavily damaged, targeted often and damaged by the Israeli military, and get back to its primary work. In the meantime, there are temporary learning centers, and there's distance learning for about 25,000 young people in Gaza. And then finally, UNRWA is providing trauma care and for traumatized children and their families, hundreds of thousands of children and their families, and also cleaning up massive amounts of waste, often toxic waste that has accumulated with the rubble, the destruction of the sewer system. We've heard of our staff, our colleagues at UNRWA, talking about the odor in the air of both death and just rotting toxic waste. So no matter how many trucks Israel lets UNRWA bring in or not, like I said, some 12,000 staff are on the ground, and they are the backbone of any humanitarian operation in Gaza, just simply by the number of experienced doctors, nurses, health workers, civil engineers, etc.
How many personnel have you lost since October 7th, 2023?
Yeah, UNRWA has lost 380 staff members, and this is more than more UN staff members who've been killed in any crisis in history. This is a travesty. And frankly, having been at my job for the last almost 6 years and watching the outright, misinformation and I hate to say it, but coordinated propaganda against the agency, it appears somehow that this allowed so many UN staff for the first time in history to be killed at these numbers. These were mothers and fathers. These were humanitarian aid workers whose work was under the blue flag of the United Nations, and were killed, really paying the absolute sacrifice to take care of their fellow human beings. It is an utter tragedy. The staff of UNRWA are just like anybody in Gaza who have been suffering, who've been starving, who have faced bombing after bombing, who've been unable to sleep at night for fear of them or their loved ones waking up dead. Many of them have lost family members themselves. So we really, as the world community, need to come together and honor these thousands of individuals who really have done a service that few of us would be able to continue under such conditions, and 380 have paid the ultimate sacrifice for these services.
At this point, when we look at the future of aid in Gaza, again, because these strikes are so new, this new round of attacks that were just announced this morning as we're speaking, it's hard to say what the status of the ceasefire is going forward and what that will mean for aid. But what are the biggest needs right now? And is anybody coordinating that level of infrastructure, help, and supplies and everything that is necessary to meet that? Is there any big, overarching coordination of how this aid is being delivered and how it's meeting the need?
Yeah, there is some coordination, but not nearly enough. And whatever coordination is happening, whether the U.S., Israel, different humanitarian agencies, this should be a time when all of the relevant resources are put on the table. This is a humanitarian catastrophe of epic proportions. We need to be flooding the zone, so to speak, by bringing in as much aid as humanly possible. And it is just simply not enough yet, with an average of over 100 trucks a day coming in. We need to see not just commercial aid, we need to see humanitarian aid. We need to see shelter items that Israel has often not let in, so that especially as we move into winter, families will have a warm place to sleep in and take care of their children. This is a time where aid is necessary literally to save lives of people who are on the brink of starvation, facing disease, facing critical and traumatic injuries. So what we keep seeing is a lot of language, some action, but not enough. And we need to also make sure that UNRWA, with, again, the largest number of, in the thousands, in the tens of thousands, the largest number of qualified and experienced staff, being an active partner. We saw what the inverse of UNRWA was, of several months of the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which resulted in thousands of deaths of beleaguered, starving Palestinians, of making them walk to 4 sites to try to get aid while being shot at. UNRWA is the absolute inverse of that, providing dignity to the beneficiaries, meeting them where they are, and really the absolute model of the localization of effective humanitarian and development aid. And is one of the major reasons why Gaza had such a high literacy and education rate, 97% literacy rate before these atrocities. So we need to give the Palestinians of Gaza back their education, their health, their agency, and hope that they have a chance to rebuild and live normal lives like the rest of us.
Mara Cronenfeld is the executive director of the UNRWA USA National Committee. And I thank you very much, Mara, for your time, and especially on a day like this, to explain what's going on to our listeners. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. By the way, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.